Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey, what's up everybody, Shenmok here, and today we're taking a look at assassins and their subclasses. Now assassins, just as a reminder, they are melee physical damage dealers who typically try to deal damage to one enemy on the enemy team and kill them to death. But as we're about to explore, they have other uses too. So here's how I'll break them down. Just like with mages, I'll talk about their strengths, why you pick the subclass, and what you miss out by picking that subclass versus another one. And again, like I said before, there's going to be overlap between subclasses. I mean, some characters may perform one role for the laning phase and the mid game, but then turn into something completely different in the late game. And don't worry, I'll explain that too. And also, subclasses don't exist per se. If you Google subclasses or types of assassins or anything like that, you'll just find more anecdotal stuff like this. It's just a concept to help you understand the basics of how a character may function, and if they're similar to any characters you've played before. So let's start with the classics, the Teamfight assassins. So their strengths are that they have a mix of high single target damage and AoE CC. And the AoE CC is the big part of it here. Not only is AoE CC obviously easier to hit, but it means you can CC more than one person at a time. Like for example, if you're Thor, you can only stun one person. Maybe two with your ultimate, but for a short amount of time. But say if you're Hunbats, you can break apart an entire team and then single out your target. And of course, while you're breaking the team apart, your team can pick up the pieces. And of course, high CC means that they have good ganks, especially when they get help again from their teammates. Of course, the single target damage isn't really all there, especially earlier on in the match, but as long as you have a teammate there to help pick up the pieces and work off of your CC that you put down, you'll be flying in terms of ganks. But again, they're not always a guaranteed kill. Now, with some teamfight assassins like Hunbats and Susanoo, they can still one-shot late game no problem. But just generally speaking, assassins do tend to drop off in terms of damage later on, but with these teamfight assassins, you always have, typically their ultimate, to fall back on and CC an entire team for your team to come in and pick up the pieces. I've said that about 50 times, I'll try to play off that one. So of course, why you pick them is if you have a lack of CC elsewhere on the team. Say your Guardian is more of a damage-oriented Guardian, your Warrior is like an attack speed Warrior who's not bringing that much CC, so you come in with a huge amount of CC yourself, and lock down enemies for yourself for around the early and mid game, and then start locking down enemies more for your team as the game gets later and later. And of course, that means there's probably a hyper carry on the enemy team that needs to be locked down. I mean, all you gotta do is just keep Hunbatsing, Susanoo ulting them over and over again, then make them burn their beads, and then later on your teammates will burn their life away, thanks to your CC. And of course, you can also pick them if you're just not really sure what the enemy team is going to pick. Like say you're the jungler and you're picking first, so you can just pick someone who has a lot of CC, so in case you get counterpicked, at least while you're getting your jungle invaded, later on in the match you'll still have a lot of CC to shut down the enemy team. But of course what you miss out on here is that they don't really have hard single target damage, and if they do, it tends to be a little riskier and they need to commit all of their mobility. Some assassins can kill without using their dash or leap, but typically with these high CC characters, you need to pump absolutely everything into a single target to kill them. Now sometimes that's totally fine, but other times it'll just get you killed. Like for instance if they Aegis your full combo, or just Aegis at the right time. And also their damage tends to come out a little bit slower. Like again going back to Hunbats, he's got that long leap, and his 2 takes an eternity to wind up, so yeah, it's not an instant huge burst, like you might see with a Thanatos combo for example. And they also tend to be a little bit riskier, as in they probably don't have built-in CC immunity, again like my boys Susanoo and Hunbats, and they rely on blink a lot. And that's because, as I just mentioned, to do all of their damage, they need to commit their movement ability to damage. So you have a character who needs to use their movement ability and doesn't have built-in CC immunity and needs to have blink. So there's a lot of precursors to make sure they're 100% valuable in a fight. And as I mentioned, they can typically be counterpicked pretty easily, and this is again because of the lack of inherent CC immunity and a reliance on blink, meaning they probably won't have beads at the start of the match, and of course they're also really bad at dealing damage to tanks. Now, most assassins are not good at dealing with tanks, but these teamfight assassins, they're really bad against tanks. So let's move on to the opposite of that, divers/gankers. And obviously, ganking is done in the early and mid game, and then diving is done in the very late game. So what their strengths are is obviously they have the highest single target damage in the game. That is, if they can get to you. And that's good because they have higher than average mobility. These are the classes that give you insane amounts of movement speed and or have a bunch of dashes or leaps. And naturally, as such, they're super hard to get away from, so they're great at getting you fed. For example, if you kill an ADC at level 2, you'll just come back again, and again, and again, and you're way out leveling them, so not only are you faster than them and have more damage, and you could just chase them all day because you have enough single target lockdown and more than enough damage to kill them over and over again. So it's very, very easy to snowball with these characters. So why you pick them is pretty obvious, for killing a single member of the enemy team over and over again. So typically these guys tend to be more of counter picks. as in you pick them on later on in the draft. And of course, this is great against gods like Freya or Oleron, who are strong right now. There are certain characters in this subclass that are just amazing for dealing with those really strong hyper carries. And of course, also the intention is just to snowball the match out of control so that late game focused teams can't get going, or they even just surrender before they get to late game. But of course, what you miss out on is that they're very, very bad from behind. I mean, if you can't get your levels and items online to get your damage going, what's the point of the character? And also, generally speaking, they can't really help too much in teamfights other than trying to force out a kill. Unlike those teamfight assassins, these guys play more of a backseat role, and then eventually, if the space is made for them, then they blink in and try and kill somebody. Or for instance, a god like Thanatos, he literally just sits back, throws a couple sides, and then goes into the air and tries to get an execute. And as such, they're pretty bad in hyper late game situations. I mean, unless someone makes a really stupid mistake and is just walking in the jungle randomly with no teammates around, yeah, sure, one of these divers can one-shot no problem. But the tighter and tighter the team fights become, and the more damage gets on, for instance, hunters or especially mages, these divers can get one-shot before they're able to one-shot the enemy eventually, as the game keeps on going and mages get stronger and stronger. And generally speaking, though, they also need to use their movement abilities to get damage in there too. It really is all or nothing with these characters, and unlike those teamfight assassins, they typically don't have self-peel for themselves. Or I guess you could say pseudo self-peel, like if you're ulting someone with Humbats, you just kinda so happen to usually hit the tank too. And your microphone if you're me. So let's move on to the most flexible class, and the one you'll probably want to start on, Midrange Assassins. And midrange is a term I stole from Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically, these are characters who are decent gankers and are also decent in teamfights, but they don't really specialize in either one. And generally speaking, they have more early game damage than teamfight reliant assassins. But just like them, they still have decent CC, even if it's not quite as insane. And typically they also have a good mix of escape and engage mobility. These are characters who have pretty strong mobility for both getting in and out of fights, and don't necessarily need to commit their movement ability just to get a kill, although it obviously does help. So you can see what I mean by mid-range. They don't specialize in anything really, but they do have a little bit of everything we've seen so far. So why you pick them, you just want to get a flex of the possibility of getting ahead early while still being able to perform in teamfights later on. And just in general, they tend to be the safest picks possible. Sure, teamfight assassins are great safe picks generally speaking, in terms of covering your options, but as far as the character goes and not getting, farmed, these mid-range assassins are a lot better at not just losing you the game because you got behind. But of course what you miss out on is what I've been saying this whole time, being in the middle means there's not a lot of guaranteed damage and not a lot of guaranteed CC. It's just kind of half and half. It's not like a Pele where it's like if you get on someone's face, yeah, you're going to be able to 2 them, and then blow them apart. Or it's not like a Hunbats where you just put the AoE around where the enemy is and you're going to tag them with it. Just like I just tagged my mic again, I need to stop talking like an Italian. Since you could say they tend to be a little bit more difficult since they don't have such a clear strategy, you need to choose when you want to flex into being that diver and being into that teamfight assassin type of mode. And this is the class I would say falls off the hardest later on in the match. Like I mentioned, those divers, they will still one-shot someone late game if the enemy makes a mistake. And teamfight assassins obviously still have their CC. But these guys, since their CC isn't that amazing, and their damage is just above average, the later and later the game goes, the less effective they become. So that's the real trade-off here. It's not just that their CC is bad or their damage is bad, neither of those are true. They're still decent, but the simple fact of the entire assassin class getting worse and worse as the game goes on hits this subclass the hardest for sure. But speaking of the late game, let's get to hypercarry assassins. What are their strengths? I mean, pretty obvious. They have amazing damage come late game, and they are practically impossible to shut down. I mean, these gods have their counters, absolutely, but shutting down a Fed Mercury or a Fed Kali, good luck. And obviously, even though they can be difficult to pull off sometimes, they do have a simple game plan. Get to late game, and the character basically just carries you. So why you pick them? It's when you know the game will be slower, making the character worth the wait. If you see 101 early game gods in an enemy team, you're never going to be able to do anything because not only will you be unable to gank them because your damage is so lacking earlier on in the match, but it also means you're almost certainly going to be invaded. And you're going to lose out on all your farm, and if you lose out on a lot of your farm, then that just means come 30 minutes, you're still not going to have the items you need to become the hypercarry assassin. But on that note, divers are great, but matching an enemy hypercarry with one of your own can be even better. I mean, Freya's insane, but Mercury will outtrade her if the game goes late enough, and he doesn't get whooped. But of course what you miss out on, I mean, they're difficult to gank with. Mercury, Kali, yeah, it's true they have decent CC, it's almost around Thor levels of CC. But their damage is so lackluster, you really do rely on your teammates to get ganks done. And what is it that SMITE players want? Well, they expect their jungler to be ganking all 3 lanes at once, somehow, and these characters are the worst at ganking. And that also feeds into them being easy to get behind on. Because not only can you fail a gank very easily, I mean, say you're ganking with Mercury and you can't get the kill done, and then an enemy Thanatos comes out, I mean, yeah, you're gonna die and you're gonna get behind. So if you just don't go for ganks and make your teammates angry, and just stick to getting your farm, well, say if they have an enemy Thanatos, yeah, the enemy Thanatos is going to be ganking and putting your entire team behind. And no character in Smite is strong enough to carry all other 4 players, especially not melee range characters like these assassins. And also games can just end before these characters come online. Now, Mercury's been pretty blessed with having Rage being so good, but with gods like Kali or Nemesis, you can get put so far behind that you just can't get the damage you need online. Or especially in the case of Kali and Nemesis, the levels you need in your abilities. So an enemy could be at your Phoenix line before you're even level 20 or have 5 items. And obviously with these guys, they're typically pretty easy to counterpick if you pick them too early. Even someone like Mercury, who's still quite strong, I mean, if you get against a Kuzenbo or a Bologna, good luck with that. And of course, Kali, get against any anti-heal based character. Nemesis, since she has 0 CC immunity in her kit, pick like Ares, RTO, something like that against her, just like against like a Susano. I mean, yeah, it can be really rough. So you gotta wait to make sure that the coast is clear, just like I talked about with mage healers last time. Make sure the coast is clear in the draft. And if you're just solo queuing and blind pick or something, just make sure you know the risk going in. Even though these characters are ridiculous in the late game, it's not guaranteed you'll get there, and there's no guarantee you won't get farmed. So that about wraps up the Assassin subclasses. I hope you guys enjoyed. Did this help you understand the class of Assassins as a whole? Did it give you a better appreciation for certain characters? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.